Would You Kindly is one of the most memorable things that have come from Bioshock 1, and it was created by none other than Frank Fontaine himself, aka Atlas. So in today's video, what we're going to be taking a look at is the story of Frank Fontaine. As usual, I hope you guys enjoy, and if you want to check out the sources, the links will be down in the description as always. So with that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story of Frank Fontaine. At an early age, Frank Fontaine lived in an orphanage, but eventually ran away to find a job as a stage boy at a local vaudeville theater. After 3 years of work at this vaudeville theater, it gave him a lasting impression of how to influence an audience through the use of acting and costumes. Frank was his real first name, but he used many different last names throughout his life, including Gorland, Barris, Whiston, Moskowitz, and Wang. Only a few people knew Frank's real last name, one of them being a bruiser from the Bronx named Reggie, who apparently knew Frank from the old days. At one point in time, Fontaine was actually investigated by the FBI in an effort to connect him with an interstate bookmaking operation that was being run at the time. Fontaine switched his last name to Gorland soon after, even going as far as to get a forged birth certificate to fake his new forged identity. Frank Gorland settled in New York and set up a bookmaking business which operated out of the basement of a drugstore that he owned at that time. In 1946, Gorland conned a bar owner named Harv Merton into signing a contract with Hudson Loans to pay off gambling debts that he had at the time. When Merton failed to pay the interest on the loan, Gorland gained ownership of Merton's collateral, a bar in the Dock District named the Clanger. Gorland wanted the business, not only because it was a lucrative business, but because it was a perfect place to overhear rumors about boxing bets in the city. The information he overheard while bartending gave Gorland an added edge into his grifts. Soon after he started bartending at the Clanger, he overheard two gangsters talking about a plan for an up-and-coming boxer, Steele, to lose a fixed fight for payoffs. Using the fake name Lucio Fabrici, Gorland snuck in to talk to Steele before the fight and tricked the boxer into thinking that the mobster's plans had changed. Steele then surprised the mobsters by winning instead of losing, and with all of the bets going against Steele, Gorland got a large payout by betting on Steele's win. While bartending, Gorland met a federal agent named Voss, who had also been involved in the interstate bookmaking investigation. Voss threatened to do a deep investigation of Gorland's background if the grifter didn't help him by obtaining information that Voss was looking for. Voss was trying to find out details about Andrew Ryan's North Atlantic project, and wanted Gorland to tip him off with anything that he might overhear about Andrew Ryan or the project inside of his bar. The mention of Ryan pouring his wealth into the project gained Gorland's interest. Several days later, Gorland spoke to a drunken woman in his bar who claimed that her man Irving had died under mysterious circumstances while doing construction for Andrew Ryan. Her indignant ramblings tipped him off about the involvement of Ryan's business, Seaworthy Construction. Days later, Gorland followed a pair of sailors down to Andrew Ryan's ship, the Olympian, in the Dock District. Gorland tailed a deckhand as he was leaving and accosted him, pretending to be a federal agent. The frightened men revealed that Andrew Ryan's workers were laying the foundations for a city under the water of the ocean in the North Atlantic. Investigating further, Gorland pretended to be a delivery man named Bill Foster, bringing a shipment of canned goods from Seaworthy Construction's warehouse. An irate warehouse manager there had been giving him more details about Andrew Ryan's building project. Hoping to gain more information about the project, Gorland hired Reggie as extra muscle to help him interrogate Harv Merton. Under pressure, Merton tipped Gorland off about a smuggler named Frank Fontaine, who was supplying Ryan's workers with fish. This Fontaine was the owner of Fontaine Fisheries, a fishing fleet known for smuggling goods from Cuba to the United States. Gorland arranged a meeting between himself and Fontaine at a bar on Staten Island. At the meeting, Gorland convinced the smuggler that Voss was planning to frame him for smuggling drugs and had already drawn up a warrant for his arrest. This, in return, frightened Fontaine enough that he was willing to sell Gorland his fleet in exchange for enough money to retire safely back to Cuba. 2 nights later, Gorland met Fontaine on one of his former boats for the final payout. Gorland, however, had no intention of paying him. Having already fired all of Fontaine's old crew, and with no one present as witnesses except for his new loyal helmsman, Gorlin subdued Fontaine and dumped him over the side of the boat, thus drowning him in the process. From then on, Frank Gorlin assumed the smuggler's identity as his own, becoming Frank Fontaine. The new Frank Fontaine began sending flattering letters to Andrew Ryan with each shipment of fish his men delivered to Rapture. In these letters, he claimed to admire Andrew Ryan's ideals and asked eventually to be allowed down into the city so that he could set up a fishing business with a fleet of modified submarines. In truth, Frank Fontaine saw Ryan's utopia as a society as the perfect opportunity for a long-term con with a big payout in the end. In 1948, Andrew Ryan accepted Fontaine's request and had Chief of Security Sullivan meet Frank Fontaine in a boat to invite him down to the city. Fontaine brought some loyal men down to Rapture with him, including Reggie and his first mate, Peach Wilkins. Frank Fontaine arrived in Rapture sometime during 1948. He soon expanded his income by creating a smuggling ring to bring in high-demand contraband items into Rapture. Fontaine loved nothing more than the power of a good grift. He regularly disguised himself with various false identities and disguises to carry out crimes which would otherwise fail. One disguise that he mentions to Jack after Andrew Ryan is killed, and in quotes, "Hell, once I was even a Chinaman for 6 months," end quotes. Although he never spliced before the events of Bioshock, he admits at one point that he had used cocaine and heroin. A pretty good drug addict if you ask me, but I digress. In a chance encounter on Fontaine's fishing dock in Port Neptune, Bridget Tenenbaum observes the results of a sea slug's venom upon an injured hand of a worker. That sea slug produced raw atom, a substance with near miraculous medical properties. Tenenbaum went to Fontaine with a proposal that he fund research on the slugs, and he quickly saw the business possibilities of this endeavor. Fontaine set up an atom business, Fontaine Futuristics, thus employing Bridget Tenenbaum and Yi Suchong to research and develop plasmids and gene tonics. Tenenbaum informed Fontaine that they required little girls to mass-produce atom. Fontaine then created the Little Sisters Orphanage, a charity which was a front to get parents to willingly give up their children, who would then be turned into Little Sisters to generate atom without their parents' knowledge. Taking inspiration from Sophia Lamb's appeal to the lower class, Fontaine then created Fontaine's Home for the Poor, which provided housing for the poorer residents of Rapture in their free market society. Fontaine used these charity angles to boost his public image in opposition to Ryan's, while at the same time using the unfortunates for medical research. At first, Andrew Ryan observed Fontaine's rise to power as proof of the opportunity for determined men to better themselves, exactly the purpose for which he built Rapture. Even when Fontaine's empire began to compete with his own, he merely admonished Fontaine's detractors, who complained of Adam's side effects, to quote-unquote offer a better product. When Andrew Ryan discovered the criminal arm of Fontaine's enterprises, however, he saw Fontaine's smuggling operations as a serious threat to Rapture's security, as such activity might reveal the city's location to surface dwellers. Ryan instructed Security Chief Sullivan to put an end to this smuggling ring, employing increasingly severe measures to prevent and prove the connection between Fontaine and the smuggling operation. Facing growing pressures from Andrew Ryan, Fontaine engineered a backup plan, an elaborate scheme to take control of Rapture. Secretly acquiring the unborn son of Andrew Ryan from Jasmine Jolene, he instructed Dr. Suchong to artificially age, brainwash, and train the child, Jack, creating an obedient assassin whom he'd sent to the surface as a sleeper agent. On September 12, 1958, Frank Fontaine was apparently killed in a shootout with Andrew Ryan's men. His death, however, was faked, allowing Fontaine to escape punishment for the crimes he committed and giving Andrew Ryan and Rapture false hope that their nemesis was finally dead. Frank Fontaine then re-emerged as Atlas, a fisherman, hero, and family man. His original voice was now covered by a heavy and thick Irish accent. Atlas characteristically charmed the masses, pretending to be a humble freedom fighter, and by handing out supplies to the poor, telling the disillusioned what they wanted to hear. He channeled a growing discontent and disfranchisement of the poorer citizens of Rapture, setting the stage for the Rapture Civil War, which would soon tear Rapture apart. Atlas rebuilt his army of splicers and released mayhem and destruction upon Rapture, terrorizing the populace, disrupting Rapture's economy, and forcing Andrew Ryan into drastic war measures. Even without Fontaine futuristics, Frank Fontaine, or Atlas, still manages to produce much sought-after plasmids, some in his illegal production lab hidden behind Joe's Green Groceries in Siren Alley. Hoping for victory and seizing control of Rapture, Atlas eventually found himself trapped, with Ryan controlling the bathyspheres and all of the splicers through a pheromone control system. With no other way out, Atlas activated his sleeper agent, or his ace in the hole, Jack, Andrew Ryan's son. The events of Bioshock 1. For Jack, Atlas was a guide in a strange and dangerous and unfamiliar environment. He was the only voice on the other end of the radio, except for a brief moment during Atlas's quote-unquote family's death. After Andrew Ryan's demise, Atlas reveals his true persona, the criminal, Frank Fontaine, and that his goal was not simply to control Rapture, but to use it and its atom technology to extend his power to the surface and become an industrial tycoon. After Jack is freed from the effects of the Would You Kindly mind control and other mental conditioning, he finally comes face to face with Frank Fontaine in Point Prometheus. Fontaine and Atlas, now currently spliced up and displaying inhuman strength by hurling a massive iron sculpture at Jack. He says that he had never tasted Adam before then, but now he can't get enough, thus showing he's become addicted to Adam. Fontaine avoids fighting Jack, barricading himself in the tower at Point Prometheus. He threatens to flood the entire city and finding Tenenbaum's sanctuary and tearing it apart if Jack continues to pursue him. While hiding in special exhibits wing of the Old Memorial Museum, Frank Fontaine splices himself further, strapping himself into a machine that injects a massive amount of Adam into his body. Taunting Jack, he proclaims that no one can stop him and that he is all-powerful. Jack reaches Fontaine in his lair atop Rapture's highest building. The mob boss has spliced himself into a hulking, statuesque monster with 3 major plasmid powers. Every time Fontaine returns to his machine after fighting and being damaged, Jack can extract the Adam out of him with a little sister's syringe or needle, weakening him. Before Fontaine is finally drained, he disables Jack, but is ambushed and killed by a swarm of little sisters. What a absolute awesome way to go. You, the player Jack, who is this essentially superhuman that controls plasmids and can actually do things that no normal human can, can't kill Fontaine. Yet, a group of about 6 little girls with needles end up stabbing him to death. I always thought that was pretty funny. Anyways, again, I digress. They stab Frank Fontaine repeatedly with their needles, taking the remaining Adam from his body. Bridget Tenenbaum had previously explained that Adam forces the body into dependency, with progressive mental and physical degeneration and an accelerating need for more Adam. In the end, deprived of his Adam, Fontaine's body simply could not survive. The events of Bioshock 2. Even though Frank Fontaine is dead, his presence is still largely felt throughout Rapture. His business headquarters, Fontaine Futuristics, is present as a level in Bioshock 2, and he features in several audio diaries that Subject Delta finds along his journey of Rapture. The player is also able to explore Fontaine's office, where there is an audio diary named Goodbye to Fontaine, which reveals his plans to adopt his Atlas persona. Also in his office at the Fontaine Futuristics building, there is a large portrait on the wall of either Fontaine standing next to a woman and a small boy, or Fontaine's parents with a younger Frank Fontaine. The picture is entitled The Fontaine Family, but the portrait was a fabrication. The people depicted in the painting, besides Fontaine, don't actually exist. This was to make Frank Fontaine more believable due to him being a sham or a con in reality. Fontaine is mentioned in various audio diaries in Minerva's Den. It is revealed through these recordings that Reed Wall of Rapture Central Computing, seeking to make his partner, C.M. Porter, disappear and take sole control of the Thinker, took advantage of the brewing conflict between Ryan and Fontaine and manufactured a tape implicating Porter to be working for the mobster, which he handed over to Andrew Ryan's police force. This resulted in Porter's immediate arrest and imprisonment at Persephone, where he was subsequently and unfortunately transformed into an Alpha Series Big Daddy, otherwise known as Subject Sigma. The events of Bioshock Infinite, Burial at Sea, Episode 1 and Episode 2. In the Bioshock Infinite DLC, Burial at Sea Episode 1, Frank Fontaine is the subject of heated discussion among the citizens of Rapture, even as the new year rings in. He is the main focus of the need-to-know theater film, Taking the Taint Out of Fontaine, which condemns his criminal business practices and activities, explains his recent death, and the reason Andrew Ryan is now running his company, Fontaine Futuristics. This short film features a view of Fontaine's apparent corpse after the gunfight with Rapture's security took place. The majority of the game takes place in Frank Fontaine's department store. It is disclosed that Fontaine has written at least one book, Don't Let the Bastard See You Sweat, which happens to be a best-selling novel at the bookstore in the warehouse department in Fontaine Futuristics. Not until Burial at Sea Episode 2, it is learned that Frank Fontaine, still alive and disguised as Atlas, was incarcerated in his own department store, with many of his former employees captured after the Neptune's Bounty shootout. The inmates there found Elizabeth unconscious and captured Sally, the little sister. Atlas ordered his men to kill Elizabeth, but with the help of a figment of her imagination and a vision of Booker, she convinced him that she could get them all back to Rapture, thus striking a deal for her life and for Sally. Atlas at first was skeptical, but agreed when she claimed to be Suchong's lab assistant. He gave her a radio so he could keep in contact with Elizabeth. While exploring the Manta Ray Lounge, Elizabeth can uncover Fontaine's secret panic room, which contained many of his disguises, including a Chinese male's disguise, a point to his earlier claim of him being a Chinaman for 6 months. In one of his audio diaries that Elizabeth finds, Fontaine complains to Suchong that drinkable plasmids cost more atom than their injectable counterparts, and was an utterly impractical concept. So ladies and gentlemen, with Frank Fontaine, or Atlas, whichever you prefer to call him, being one of my favorite characters, this was a ton of fun to make. So I do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, would you kindly drop a like? I would greatly appreciate it. If you're new here and want to join the Rapture family, or see the Rapture family grow, would you kindly hit that subscribe button, share the video with some family and friends, it would really help the channel out a lot, and feel free to turn on notifications, that way you do not miss a video or a live stream when I go live. Also, if you want to talk to me outside of YouTube, my social medias are the best ways to do so, either my Facebook, my Instagram, or my Discord server, which are all linked down in the description below if you guys are interested. Also, my most recent videos will be popping up on the screen. I would highly recommend checking those out. They are pretty damn good videos if I do say so myself, and I think a couple of them will actually interest you guys, so I hope you check them out. Anyways, again, I do hope you enjoyed the video, and with that being said, thank you all for watching, and talk to you all in the next Bioshock video. Take care.